Welcome to At the Heart of Caregiving, the podcast for anyone caring for aging loved ones. Whether you're a family caregiver, healthcare pro, or trusted referral partner, we're here to share tips, advice, and real stories to make caregiving less stressful and more rewarding. The voices you'll hear on this podcast are AI generated, but the content is genuine and made just for you. So let's jump in and celebrate the incredible role caregivers play in the lives of seniors. Now, our AI hosts will take it from here.
Welcome back to At the Heart of Caregiving, a podcast from Caring Senior Service. Glad you could join us for Season 1, Episode 2. We're here to help you on your caregiving journey with expert insights and real advice you can use. You know, at Caring Senior Service, we get it. Being a caregiver can be tough, especially when things happen that you don't expect. That's why we're focusing on something super important today: emergency preparedness for caregivers. We'll look at why it matters so much and give you steps you can take to be ready for any crisis.
You know, it's funny how often people forget about getting ready for emergencies, but for caregivers, it's really important. Emergencies can mess up routines, make it harder to get to important services, and just really increase stress levels, all of which affect both you and the person you care for.
You're right. It's different when you're taking care of someone else. So how do we even start with all of this?
Well, a good first step is remembering that emergencies can be big or small. We're not just talking about hurricanes or earthquakes. It could be a power outage, a bad storm, or even a sudden health problem. The point is to be prepared, not scared.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But getting ready can feel overwhelming. There's so many different things that could happen.
Oh, absolutely. That's why it helps to have a plan. I found the guide from FEMA and the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregivers to be really useful. It's called the Disaster Preparedness Guide for Caregivers. They make it easier to understand.
I love that those two groups work together. FEMA knows about disasters, and the Rosalynn Carter Institute knows all about caregiving. It's a great mix.
Yeah, exactly. Their first step is figuring out what might get in the way or be risky. It's almost like a reality check for what's going on in your life.
So really looking at our situation and figuring out what we're not so good at.
Yeah, that's it. It's about being honest about things like how well your loved one can move around, any medical problems they have, and how they usually react to stress.
So if someone has trouble moving, getting out quickly could be a problem. Or if they need medical equipment that plugs in, a power outage would be serious.
Exactly. You're already thinking about the right things. This step is all about making your plan fit your situation.
That's where those checklists are helpful.
Right.
The ones that make you think about things like mobility, medical needs, and even how someone likes to communicate.
Yep. Those checklists are great for making you think. You can find really good ones on ready.gov and the American Red Cross website. They help you consider all sorts of things that might happen during an emergency.
I'm going to download those right now. Before we move on, there's one more thing I want to talk about: building a support network. I've heard that's really important for caregivers, especially when there's an emergency.
Oh, it's super important. You can't do this all by yourself. Think about it. Who are the people and places that could help during a crisis?
So family, friends, neighbors, maybe people I work with.
Yes, but also think about other groups. Local groups, churches, doctors, people who provide services, even social service organizations.
Wow, I hadn't thought about some of those.
It's about using every possible resource, and it's not just about having a list of names, it's about planning ahead.
What do you mean?
Talk to people now, before an emergency happens. Talk about who can do what, who can help with evacuating, who can check on your loved one if you can't, who has a key to your house.
It's smart. It's about making a plan and being sure everyone understands what they need to do. I remember seeing something about a caregiver emergency team on a checklist from AARP.
That's a great way to think about it. Your emergency team is your lifeline. And here's another important tip from that checklist. Write down your loved one's needs.
Right. Like what medicines they take, allergies, medical conditions, anything someone might need to know if they were helping out.
Exactly. Make sure you have that info where you can find it easily. And share it with your emergency team. You never know when you might need someone to step in. And having those details ready can be a lifesaver.
It's about helping your team take the best care possible, even when things are crazy.
Right. And you know what else is really important in a crazy situation? Communication.
Let's talk about that. Communication seems like it would be so important before, during, and after an emergency.
You're right. It's about staying informed, talking to your support network, and making sure your loved one's needs are understood.
Okay, so how do we start with that? What are the most important things to think about when it comes to communicating in an emergency?
Well, First things first, make sure you're signed up for those local government alerts. That's usually how they'll tell you about evacuations and stuff.
Then what about those weather alerts? From the National Weather Service, I mean.
Yeah.
Especially if you live somewhere with crazy storms.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Knowing what the weather's going to do is super important. You can also download the American Red Cross app. It's called the Emergency app. Gives you real-time updates and stuff. And it can even help you find shelters.
Those apps can be so helpful. I use them for traffic and weather all the time.
Yeah, they can make a big difference. And don't forget about those old-school battery-powered radios. You know, the emergency ones. They can be a lifesaver if the power goes out.
Good point. It's always good to have a backup. Speaking of backups, we need to talk about supplies. What are the things every caregiver should have ready?
That's where Go Kits and stay-at-home kits come in.
Oh yeah, you mentioned those. What are they exactly, and why are they so important?
Okay, so a Go Kit is like a survival kit you can grab if you need to evacuate quickly. It should have enough stuff for you and your loved one for at least 3 days.
3 days, got it. And the stay-at-home kit.
That one's for when you're staying put. Like, if it's safer to stay home, it should have at least 2 weeks of supplies.
2 weeks, okay. So what kind of things should we put in these kits?
Well, think about the basics. Water, food, a flashlight, a radio, a first aid kit, batteries, a can opener if you've got canned food, and any medicines you need.
Right, of course.
Oh, and copies of important documents like medical info, insurance cards and stuff. Cash is good to have too. And don't forget personal hygiene things.
So many things to remember.
And if you have pets, don't forget their stuff too.
It's like packing for a camping trip, but way more important.
That's a good way to think about it. And hey, don't forget to pack stuff that makes you feel better, like a book, some cards, or maybe a photo album. Those things can really help when you're stressed.
That's true. Sometimes it's the little things that make a difference. I also remember the guide mentioned having a month's worth of medicine. Seems like a smart idea.
Absolutely. You might not be able to get more medicine easily after an emergency, so having extra is really important. And don't forget about backup batteries or chargers for medical devices, like CPAP machines or wheelchairs.
Oh yeah, that's easy to forget. But those things are so important.
Now, going back to the guide, it talks about how not all caregivers are in the same situation, right? They give advice for different scenarios, like if you're preparing with the person you're caring for, or if you have a support network, or if you're doing it all on your own.
That's really helpful. It shows they understand that caregiving is different for everyone.
Exactly.
Right.
So if you're prepping with your loved one, talk to them and work together. See if there are things they can do to help. Even small things like gathering documents or packing a bag.
I like that. It's about being a team, even when you're just getting ready.
Right. Now, if you have a support network, make sure you plan together as a group. Figure out who's doing what, who can help with transportation, who can check on your loved one if you can't, who's handling communication with family and friends.
Like a playbook for your team.
Yeah.
What about solo caregivers? How do they handle all of this?
The guide knows that solo caregiving is tough, and it says to be realistic. You might not be able to do everything yourself, so reach out for help. Community organizations and support groups can be really helpful.
That makes sense. It's okay to ask for help. You mentioned some really helpful resources earlier. Can you remind us about those? And maybe tell us about some others that caregivers might find useful.
Sure thing. We talked about ready.gov and the American Red Cross. Their websites have tons of information, including those checklists we talked about.
The ones for Go Kits and stay-at-home kits?
Yeah, those.
And the Rosalynn Carter Institute has some great stuff too, right?
They do. Their Prepared Caregivers toolkit is excellent. It's made for people taking care of veterans, but the ideas apply to anyone.
And what about FEMA?
Oh, right. They have guides specifically for people with disabilities and older adults. Really helpful for caregivers. They even have an app that gives you alerts, shows you where shelters are and stuff like that. Every caregiver should have it. And don't forget your local area agencies on aging. They can hook you up with resources in your community.
It's amazing how much help is out there. You just got to know where to look. It's good to know you don't have to do this alone.
Exactly. There are so many people ready to help. Now, before we finish up, there's one more thing. It's easy to forget about. In all the planning and everything, self-care.
Oh, that's so important. It's easy to get so busy taking care of someone else
Nah,
that you forget about yourself.
it happens all the time. But remember, you can't help anyone if you're running on empty. Taking care of yourself is important.
It's like they say on airplanes. Put your oxygen mask on first before you help anyone else.
Perfect analogy. Make sure you're eating healthy, getting enough sleep, and finding ways to deal with stress. And don't be afraid to ask for help. There are resources like the Disaster Distress Helpline. They can give you support and help when things are tough.
That number is 1-800-985-5990. Write that down. It might come in handy.
And remember, you're not alone. There are lots of other caregivers out there. Going through the same things, talking to people who understand can really help.
We've talked about a lot in this deep dive, about getting ready for emergencies. We covered why it's so important, how to build your support network, figuring out your loved one's needs, coming up with ways to communicate, getting those essential supplies, and planning for different situations, like evacuations and staying home.
Right. And we talked about making your plan fit your situation and all those great resources that can help.
And of course, taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. Taking these steps will help keep you and your loved ones safe.
As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this thought. What's one small thing you can do today to start building your emergency plan? It doesn't have to be huge. Maybe download that FEMA app or talk to a neighbor about checking on your loved one if the power goes out. Every little bit helps.
I like that. Getting ready is a process.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into emergency preparedness. We hope this was helpful and gave you some things to think about. Be sure to visit the Caring Senior Service website for more resources and support. Until next time, take care of yourselves and your loved ones.